Careful, buddy. Maybe stick to the kiddie table next time.
The fluorescent lights in my cubicle buzzed like angry wasps as I stared at the security breach alert flashing on my screen. Another SQL injection attempt on the customer database. Third one this week. I glanced at my watch. 7:47 p.m. The office was empty except for the cleaning crew and me, the guy who everyone called when their computers stopped working. "David, don't embarrass me at my work party tonight." Victoria's voice echoed from our bedroom down the hall of our overpriced San Francisco apartment. The party. Right. Her quarterly company gala, where she'd spend 3 hours networking and pretending I didn't exist. I closed the breach report and walked to our bedroom, where my wife of 4 years was adjusting a black dress that cost more than my monthly salary. Victoria Sterling, she kept her maiden name for brand recognition, was everything Silicon Valley valued: ambitious, connected, and ruthlessly efficient at climbing corporate ladders. "I won't embarrass you," I said, loosening my tie. "Same as always." She studied me in the mirror with those calculating gray eyes that once made me feel special. Now, they just made me feel cataloged. "Good. Blake Morrison will be there tonight. He's the vice president of sales at Zenith Digital. Very important connections. Blake Morrison." I'd heard that name more often lately, usually accompanied by Victoria working late or taking mysterious phone calls. But hey, what did I know? I was just the cybersecurity analyst who kept everyone's secrets safe. The gala was held on the rooftop of some trendy downtown high-rise, the kind of place where appetizers cost $30 and everyone's business card was made of recycled ocean plastic. Victoria immediately disappeared into the crowd of tech executives, leaving me standing by the bar like a coat she'd forgotten to check. "Gin and tonic," I told the bartender, scanning the crowd for familiar faces. There weren't many. Victoria's world and mine intersected about as often as solar eclipses. "You must be Victoria's husband." I turned to find a tall man in an expensive suit extending his hand. Square jaw, perfect teeth, the kind of confident smile that said he'd never met a door he couldn't open or a person he couldn't charm. "Blake Morrison," he said, gripping my hand just a little too firmly. "VP of Sales at Zenith. David Walsh. Cybersecurity at Data Vault Solutions." His smile faltered for a microsecond. "Ah, the IT guy Victoria keeps at home. Must be nice having a wife who actually makes real money." I took a sip of my drink, studying his face. There was something familiar about his expression, the same look Victoria got when she was calculating angles. "Someone has to keep the lights on." Blake laughed, but his eyes stayed cold. "Right. Well, try not to talk shop too much tonight. These events are about making connections, not fixing printers." He walked away before I could respond, which was probably for the best. I had a dozen comebacks, none of them appropriate for Victoria's career advancement. I spent the next hour watching Victoria work the room with Blake never far behind. They moved like dancers who'd rehearsed their routine, synchronizing approaches to important clients, tag-teaming conversations with practiced efficiency. It was impressive, actually, also completely nauseating. "David! There you are." Victoria appeared at my elbow with a client in tow, some venture capitalist with more money than sense who wanted to know if our data centers were blockchain ready. I gave him the polite technical explanation, while Victoria smiled and nodded like she understood a word of it. The client wandered off, satisfied, and Victoria immediately relaxed. "Thanks, I owe you one. Just add it to the tab." She was already looking past me, scanning for her next target. "I'm going to mingle a bit more. Try to enjoy yourself, okay?" I watched her glide back toward Blake, who was holding court near the champagne fountain. He saw her coming and said something that made her laugh, the real laugh, not the networking one. His hand brushed her arm as she joined his circle, lingering just a moment too long. Interesting. I was heading back to the bar when Blake intercepted me, slightly unsteady on his feet. 3 drinks minimum, judging by the flush in his cheeks. "Dave! Having fun yet?" "It's David. And sure." "Good, good." He swayed slightly, then leaned in closer. "You know what your problem is, Dave? You think small. Victoria thinks big. That's why she's going places and you're fixing computers." The bartender was watching us now, probably wondering if he should cut Blake off. I kept my voice level. "Cybersecurity is a little more complex than that." "Is it, though?" Blake's grin turned predatory. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you spend your days making sure other people's important work doesn't get interrupted by hackers. Support staff, basically." I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that came with being underestimated. It was a feeling I'd grown accustomed to, the quiet guy in the corner who people assumed was harmless because he didn't swagger or demand attention. "Someone has to do the unglamorous work," I said. "Exactly." Blake raised his champagne glass. "The little people. Very important." He took a step closer, and I caught the full force of his alcohol-soaked breath. "Must be hard, though, being married to someone so much more successful than you." The rooftop seemed to go quiet around us. I was aware of other conversations pausing, heads turning slightly in our direction. Victoria was across the deck, deep in conversation with a potential client, oblivious to the small drama unfolding by the bar. "I'm proud of Victoria's success," I said. "Of course you are, very modern of you." Blake's smile was all teeth now. Though I have to wonder, what does a woman like that see in a guy like you? The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. I could feel eyes on us, the subtle shift in attention that happens when conflict threatens to break the surface of polite society. I was about to respond when Blake took a step backward, deliberately bumping into a server carrying a tray of wine glasses. The collision sent red wine cascading across the front of my shirt and jacket, the dark stain spreading like blood across the white fabric. "Whoops." Blake's voice was loud enough to draw every eye on the rooftop. "Sorry about that, buddy. Maybe stick to the kiddie table next time." The server was mortified, offering napkins and apologies while Blake watched with satisfied amusement. I could feel the heat of embarrassment creeping up my neck as conversations died around us. Victoria looked up from her client meeting, her face flushing when she saw the scene. "It's fine," I told the server, taking the napkins. "Accidents happen." I walked toward the restroom, leaving a trail of whispered conversations in my wake. In the mirror, I looked like a crime scene, wine soaked into my shirt, jacket ruined, dignity somewhere on the floor back there with Blake Morrison's foot on it. I spent 10 minutes trying to clean the stain, knowing it was hopeless. The wine had set, just like the humiliation. When I emerged from the bathroom, Victoria was waiting in the hallway. "What happened out there?" Blake spilled wine on me. Her eyes flashed with something, anger, embarrassment, maybe disappointment. "David, you can't let people walk all over you like that. It makes me look weak by association." The words hit like a physical blow. Not concern for my humiliation, not anger at Blake's behavior. Worry about her image. "You're right," I said quietly. "I should have handled it better." Relief flickered across her face. "Good. Blake's an important connection, so don't take it personally, okay? He was probably just drunk." I nodded and followed her back to the party, where Blake Morrison was regaling a group with some story that involved lots of gesturing and laughter. He caught my eye across the crowd and raised his glass in a mock toast. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced smiles and careful conversation. I played the role of the understanding husband, the supportive spouse who didn't make waves. It was a role I'd perfected over 4 years of marriage to Victoria Sterling. But as we drove home in silence, her checking emails while I navigated traffic, a different thought began forming in my mind. Blake Morrison thought he could humiliate me because I was just the IT guy. Victoria let it happen because she was more worried about her networking than her husband. They both forgot something important. I wasn't just any IT guy. I was the cybersecurity analyst who knew where all the digital bodies were buried. And in Silicon Valley, information wasn't just power, it was nuclear warfare. Some mistakes you only make once, others destroy everything you've ever built. The next morning, I sat in my cubicle with a cup of coffee and a new perspective on my marriage. The wine stain on my shirt had come out with some industrial-strength detergent, but the humiliation was proving more stubborn. Rough night? Jenny Nakamura appeared at my cubicle entrance, holding 2 cups of coffee. She was my only real friend at Data Vault, a network engineer who actually understood what I did for a living. Blake Morrison decided to redecorate my shirt with red wine. Jenny winced. The VP from Zenith Digital? I've heard he's a piece of work. What's his connection to Victoria? They work in the same industry. Cross-pollination of professional networks. The corporate speak felt bitter in my mouth. Jenny studied my face with the intuition that came from 3 years of working closely together. You okay? Fine. Just thinking about security protocols. It wasn't entirely a lie. I was thinking about security, specifically the kind of security that came from knowing exactly what people were hiding. After Jenny left, I opened my legitimate monitoring software and began my morning routine. As the senior cybersecurity analyst, I had broad access to Data Vault's systems and the authority to investigate potential threats. It was part of my job to monitor communications for security breaches, corporate espionage, and policy violations. What I found in Victoria's email history made me forget all about Blake Morrison's wine stunt. The encrypted messages dated back 8 months. Victoria and Blake had been using a secure communication app, but they'd made the amateur mistake of backing up their conversations to cloud storage that interfaced with their corporate accounts. Digital breadcrumbs that a skilled security analyst could follow. The early messages were flirtatious, the kind of thing that made my coffee taste like ash. But as I traced the conversation forward, a bigger picture emerged. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning something much more ambitious. Blake, the client list from your Q3 presentation would be perfect for our initial outreach. Victoria, I can get you the contact database, but we need to be careful about timing. David handles all the cybersecurity monitoring at Data Vault. Blake, your husband? He's not exactly criminal mastermind material. Victoria, he's smarter than he looks, but he's also completely loyal. As long as we're discreet, he won't suspect anything. I leaned back in my chair, processing the implications. My wife and her boyfriend weren't just cheating, they were planning to steal client data and start their own firm. Corporate espionage with a side of adultery. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. They were worried about my cybersecurity skills discovering their plan while using those same skills to commit corporate crimes. I spent the rest of the morning documenting everything, building a timeline of their conspiracy. Victoria had been feeding Blake information about Data Vault's clients for months, helping him poach accounts for Zenith Digital. Now they were planning to leave their respective companies and start their own venture, taking both client bases with them. Find anything interesting? I nearly jumped out of my skin. Jenny was back, this time with sandwiches from the deli downstairs. Just the usual corporate malfeasance, I said, minimizing my screens. Jenny sat on the edge of my desk, unwrapping her sandwich. Speaking of malfeasance, I saw your wife yesterday, at the Marriott downtown, having what looked like a very intimate lunch with some guy in an expensive suit. My stomach dropped, but I kept my voice steady. Probably a client meeting. Maybe. Though they seemed more interested in each other than the menu. I took a bite of my sandwich, buying time to think. Jenny wasn't the type to spread gossip, which meant she was genuinely concerned. It also meant Victoria and Blake were being sloppy, thinking I was too oblivious to notice or too weak to act on it. Jenny, hypothetically speaking, if someone was using company resources to steal client data, what would be the best way to document it? She raised an eyebrow. Hypothetically? You'd want time-stamped communications, access logs showing unauthorized data transfers, and evidence of the stolen information being used for competitive advantage. She paused. This is about more than just an affair, isn't it? I nodded slowly. Much more. How can I help? That afternoon, while Victoria attended what she claimed was a strategic planning session with her team, I expanded my investigation. Jenny provided cover stories for my system access and helped me trace the digital footprints Blake and Victoria had left across multiple platforms. What we found was even worse than I'd expected. Blake Morrison wasn't just planning to steal clients. He was already using company resources for personal ventures, violating his employment contract in ways that could land him in serious legal trouble. Victoria had been sharing confidential client lists, financial projections, and strategic plans with Blake's company for months. But the real kicker came in their most recent messages, the ones from just 3 days ago. Blake, we need to accelerate the timeline. I think David might be getting suspicious. Victoria, what makes you say that? Blake, just a feeling. Guy gives me the creeps with his quiet act. Plus, he has too much access to company data. Victoria, maybe we should consider making him a liability instead of just an obstacle. Blake, what do you mean? Victoria, plant evidence that he's the one stealing data. Corporate espionage charges would destroy his credibility and give us cover for the real operation. I read the message 3 times before the full implications sank in. They weren't content with cheating and stealing. They wanted to frame me for their crimes, making me the fall guy while they rode off into the sunset with stolen client data and my reputation in ruins. That's when Blake Morrison made his second mistake of the week. I was working late again, documenting the last pieces of evidence, when I heard footsteps in the hallway. The cleaning crew had finished hours ago, and security usually didn't make rounds until midnight. I minimized my screens and listened. The footsteps stopped outside my cubicle. Burning the midnight oil, Dave? Blake Morrison stepped into view, and I could smell the alcohol on him from 6 feet away. His expensive suit was rumpled, his perfect hair disheveled. He'd clearly been drinking at one of those Silicon Valley networking events where venture capitalists got hammered on artisanal cocktails. It's David, and yes, security never sleeps. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Right, security. Your wife mentioned you might be asking questions about her work schedule. I kept my hand steady on the keyboard. Victoria's schedule isn't really my business. Smart man. Because some questions are better left unasked. He stepped closer, looming over my desk. Victoria also mentioned you've been accessing company databases more than usual. Looking for something specific? The threat was obvious, but his delivery was sloppy. Drunk Blake was far less subtle than sober Blake, which meant he was more dangerous and more likely to make mistakes. Just doing my job, I said. See, that's what bothers me about you tech guys. You think your job gives you license to snoop around where you don't belong? He leaned down, putting his hands on my desk. Maybe it's time you minded your own business. I stood up slowly, which put us almost face to face. Blake was taller, but I had the advantage of sobriety and knowing exactly what kind of man I was dealing with. This is my business, I said quietly. Literally, you're standing in my office threatening me while drunk. That seems like a security issue I should be concerned about. His face flushed red. You think you're clever, don't you? Sitting here in your little cubicle, playing with your computers while real men do real work. Real work like stealing client data? The words slipped out before I could stop them, but I didn't regret them. Blake's expression shifted from anger to something much more dangerous. What did you say? I think you heard me. He grabbed the front of my shirt, pulling me close enough that I could see the bloodshot capillaries in his eyes. You have no idea who you're messing with, you pathetic little... I broke his grip with a move I'd learned in college self-defense classes, twisting away and putting the desk between us. Blake stumbled backward, surprised by the sudden resistance. You want to do this here? I asked. In my office, with security cameras recording everything? He looked up at the ceiling cameras, then back at me. Drunk or not, he was still calculating the angles. This isn't over. No, I agreed. It's not. After he left, I sat back down and opened the files I'd been working on. Blake Morrison had just confirmed everything I'd suspected and given me something even more valuable, evidence that he was willing to use violence to protect his conspiracy. The security footage would show him threatening me, grabbing my shirt, making verbal threats about minding my own business. Combined with the digital evidence of the corporate espionage plot, it painted a picture of a desperate man willing to do anything to protect his schemes. But I wasn't going to report him. Not yet. Blake Morrison thought he could intimidate me because I was just the quiet IT guy who fixed computers and stayed out of the way. Victoria thought she could betray me because I was too weak and loyal to fight back. They were both about to learn something important about underestimating people. Sometimes the person you dismiss as harmless is the one who destroys you. I spent the rest of the night building the framework for their destruction. Not revenge, justice. There's a difference, though the end result would be the same. By morning, I had a plan that would expose their crimes, destroy their conspiracy, and ensure they faced consequences for trying to frame an innocent man. It was elegant, thorough, and completely legal. Blake Morrison was right about one thing. I was just the IT guy, but he forgot what IT guys actually do for a living. We control the information, and information is power. I spent the next 3 days playing the role of the defeated husband. Victoria came home from her late meetings with Blake, and I greeted her with tired smiles and questions about dinner. When she mentioned working on a big new project that might require more travel, I nodded supportively and asked if there was anything I could do to help. The performance was apparently convincing, because their encrypted communications became increasingly careless. Victoria. David's been much more manageable lately. I think Blake's little visit to his office got the message across. Blake. Good. We can't afford to have him snooping around while we're setting up the new company. Victoria. How's the incorporation paperwork coming along? Blake. Almost finished. Sterling Morrison Consulting will be operational within 2 weeks. I've already got 3 clients lined up from the Zenith database. Victoria. And I've identified 7 Data Vault accounts worth at least $2 million in annual revenue. We can approach them the day after I submit my resignation. Reading their messages felt like watching a slow-motion car crash. They were accelerating toward their own destruction, confident that they'd neutralized the only threat to their scheme. Jenny helped me build the digital paper trail, though I didn't tell her the full scope of what we were documenting. She thought we were just gathering evidence of corporate espionage, not realizing that the espionage was being committed by my wife and her boyfriend. This is some serious stuff, Jenny said, reviewing the communications logs. Whoever's doing this is looking at federal charges if they get caught. I know. You seem remarkably calm about the fact that someone's stealing your company's data. I looked up from my screen. Maybe I'm just confident they'll get caught. Jenny studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Well, when they do get caught, the evidence is ironclad. No lawyer in the world could explain away this kind of digital trail. That evening, Victoria announced she was having drinks with some colleagues to discuss a potential new business venture. She'd be out late, maybe very late, so I shouldn't wait up. Sounds exciting, I said. New venture in marketing? Consulting, actually. There's a real opportunity in the market for firms that can bridge the gap between sales and marketing strategies. I nodded enthusiastically. That's exactly the kind of innovative thinking the industry needs. She kissed me on the cheek before leaving, probably the most physical affection I'd received in months. It was meant to be reassuring, I think, but it felt more like a Judas kiss. After she left, I opened my laptop and began the final phase of the plan. Blake Morrison's company, Zenith Digital, was already hemorrhaging clients due to security breaches. Not major ones, nothing that would make headlines, but enough to create instability in their customer base. Companies were quietly moving their accounts to more secure competitors, citing concerns about data protection. The beautiful irony was that Blake was too focused on his conspiracy with Victoria to notice his own company was falling apart around him. While he'd been planning corporate espionage, I'd been ensuring that the cybersecurity systems protecting his existing business were adequate. Barely adequate. It wasn't sabotage, technically. I hadn't broken any laws or directly attacked their systems. I'd simply made sure that when security vulnerabilities appeared, and they always did in the software industry, the patches were implemented slowly at Zenith Digital. Their firewall updates were delayed, their intrusion detection systems received low-priority maintenance, and their staff training on phishing attempts was remarkably inadequate. The result was a company that looked secure from the outside, but was slowly bleeding data and client confidence. Tonight, Blake and Victoria would be celebrating the launch of Sterling Morrison Consulting, completely unaware that their scheme was about to implode. My phone buzzed with a text from Jenny. "Working late again. You really need to get a life outside the office." I smiled and typed back, "Just finishing up a big project. Should be wrapped up by tomorrow." She responded with a thumbs-up emoji, followed by, "Well, whatever you're working on, I hope it's worth all these late nights." It would be. I was sure of that. I spent the next 4 hours putting the finishing touches on the most comprehensive corporate espionage case file in Silicon Valley history. Every communication, every data transfer, every policy violation, every attempt to frame me for their crimes, all documented with timestamps, metadata, and digital signatures that would hold up in any court. But the evidence was just the foundation. The real masterpiece was the delivery mechanism. Blake and Victoria thought they were launching Sterling Morrison Consulting next week with a spectacular client presentation to 7 major accounts stolen from DataVault and Zenith. What they didn't know was that I'd identified every one of those accounts and traced the stolen data they planned to use in their pitch. More importantly, I'd arranged for representatives from both DataVault and Zenith Digital to be present at their launch presentation. Not as guests, as observers documenting the theft of their proprietary information. The presentation was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. in a conference room at the Marriott downtown. Victoria thought I'd be safely tucked away at DataVault, debugging server issues that didn't exist. Blake assumed I was too intimidated by his office visit to cause trouble. They were both wrong. At 11 p.m., my phone rang. Victoria. "Hey, honey. Just wanted to let you know I'll be staying at Sarah's place tonight. We've been drinking, and it's not safe to drive." Sarah was Victoria's college roommate who lived in Seattle. The lie was so casual, so perfectly delivered, that I almost admired her skill. "That's smart," I said. "Tell Sarah I said hello." "I will. Love you." "Love you too." After hanging up, I checked the GPS tracker I'd installed on Victoria's phone 3 days ago. She was at the Marriott downtown, probably celebrating with Blake in some expensive suite paid for with stolen consulting fees. I opened my laptop and sent an encrypted message to the security directors at DataVault and Zenith Digital. The message contained a time, location, and promise that they'd witnessed the most brazen case of corporate espionage in Silicon Valley history. Then I sent a second message to the FBI's Corporate Crimes Division, along with a comprehensive evidence file that would keep federal prosecutors busy for months. Finally, I composed an email to Blake Morrison and Victoria Sterling, scheduled to be delivered at exactly 2:15 p.m. tomorrow, 15 minutes after their presentation began. The subject line read, "Regarding your new business venture." The message was simple. "Some mistakes you only make once. Others destroy everything you've ever built. See you at the Marriott." The IT guy. I closed the laptop and went to bed. Tomorrow, Blake Morrison and Victoria Sterling would discover what happened when you underestimated the quiet guy in the corner. They thought they could humiliate me, steal from their companies, and frame me for their crimes. They thought I was too weak to fight back and too stupid to see through their conspiracy. They forgot something important. I wasn't just any IT guy. I was the cybersecurity analyst who knew where all the digital bodies were buried, and I'd just finished digging their graves. Thursday afternoon arrived gray and drizzly, typical San Francisco weather that matched my mood perfectly. I sat in my rental car across from the Marriott, watching well-dressed executives stream into the lobby for various meetings and conferences. At 1:45 p.m., Blake Morrison's silver BMW pulled into the valet circle. He stepped out wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, projecting the kind of confidence that came from never having faced real consequences for his actions. Victoria emerged from the passenger side in a navy blue power suit, carrying herself with the poise of someone about to make a career-defining presentation. They walked into the hotel together, and I could see Blake's hand on the small of her back, a gesture of possession that made my stomach turn. My phone buzzed. Text from Jenny. "Whatever you're doing today, good luck." I typed back, "Thanks. Should be interesting." At 1:55, I walked into the Marriott lobby and took the elevator to the third floor. The Sterling Morrison consulting presentation was being held in Conference Room B, according to the hotel directory, right next to Conference Room A, where I'd arranged a very different kind of meeting. Through the glass doors, I could see Victoria setting up her laptop while Blake glad-handed potential clients. 7 executives from major tech companies, all of whom thought they were attending a presentation by an exciting new consulting firm. None of them realized they were about to witness a masterclass in corporate espionage. In Conference Room A, 3 very different men waited with laptops and legal notepads. Thomas Wright, Director of Security for Data Vault Solutions; Marcus Kim, Chief Information Officer for Zenith Digital; and Special Agent Patricia Reynolds from the FBI's White Collar Crime Division. I'd spent an hour on the phone with Agent Reynolds yesterday, walking through the evidence file and explaining the scope of the conspiracy. She'd been skeptical until I sent her the communication logs and financial records documenting the stolen data. "Mr. Walsh," she'd said, "if this evidence is authentic, you've just handed us the largest corporate espionage case we've seen this year. It's authentic, and it's about to get much more interesting." At 2 p.m. exactly, I knocked on the door of Conference Room A. Agent Reynolds let me in, and I took a seat at the table where my laptop was already connected to the room's presentation system. "Are you sure about the timing?" Thomas Wright asked. He looked nervous, which was understandable. His own company's data had been stolen, and he was about to watch the thieves use it in a sales presentation. They'll start with opening remarks, then move to their proprietary methodology, which is actually DataVault's client retention analysis with the serial numbers filed off, I said. The stolen Zenith data comes in around slide 15, repackaged as market research. Marcus Kim shook his head. "Blake Morrison has been with our company for 3 years. I never would have suspected he was capable of this. People are capable of surprising things when they think they won't get caught." At 2:05, I activated the recording software and began streaming the presentation from next door. The hotel's conference rooms shared a network infrastructure, and it had taken me exactly 12 minutes to gain access to their presentation system. Victoria's voice came through the speakers clearly. "Welcome everyone to Sterling Morrison Consulting. Today we're going to show you how our innovative approach to data-driven marketing can revolutionize your customer acquisition strategies." Agent Reynolds leaned forward. "Is this being recorded?" "Everything. Audio, video, screen captures of their slides, and network logs showing the stolen data being transmitted in real time." Blake's voice joined Victoria's. "Our proprietary analysis methodology has identified market opportunities that traditional consulting firms miss completely." I opened my laptop and displayed the first stolen document, DataVault's customer retention analysis, dated 6 months ago. On the neighboring screen, Victoria was presenting the exact same analysis with the Sterling Morrison logo in the corner. "Slide for slide," I said. They didn't even bother changing the formatting. Thomas Wright's face had gone red with anger. "That's 6 months of my team's work. Do you know how many hours went into that analysis?" "Actually, yes. Jenny Nakamura tracked the development time. 437 hours across 6 analysts." The presentation continued next door, with Blake and Victoria smoothly transitioning between stolen data vault research and pilfered Zenith market data. They presented it all with the confidence of innovators sharing breakthrough insights, never mentioning that every slide had been stolen from their current employers. At 2:14, my scheduled email was delivered to Blake's phone. I watched through the network feed as his device lit up with the notification. He glanced at it during Victoria's explanation of revolutionary customer segmentation techniques, and his face went pale. He whispered something to Victoria, who checked her own phone. Even from the next room, I could see her posture change as she read my message. Regarding your new business venture, some mistakes you only make once. Others destroy everything you've ever built. See you at the Marriott. The IT guy. Blake's eyes darted around the room, suddenly paranoid. Victoria's confidence wavered for the first time, her smooth presentation rhythm faltering as she processed the implications of my message. But they were committed now, in the middle of a presentation to 7 potential clients worth millions in revenue. They had to keep going, even knowing they'd been caught. I think it's time to introduce ourselves, Agent Reynolds said, standing up. We walked to conference room B as a group, the FBI agent, 2 corporate security directors, and the IT guy who'd built their case. I knocked on the glass door, and Blake Morrison's face went white as he saw me flanked by law enforcement. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, entering the room, I apologize for the interruption, but I think you should know that the presentation you're watching contains stolen proprietary data from Data Vault Solutions and Zenith Digital. The room erupted in confusion. Victoria tried to maintain her composure, but Blake looked ready to bolt for the emergency exit. Agent Reynolds stepped forward, badge visible. I'm Special Agent Reynolds with the FBI. Blake Morrison and Victoria Sterling, you're both under arrest for conspiracy to commit corporate espionage. This is ridiculous, Victoria snapped, her marketing polish finally cracking. David, what the hell do you think you're doing? I connected my laptop to their presentation system, replacing their slides with the evidence file I'd compiled. The screen filled with their encrypted communications, time-stamped data transfers, and financial records documenting months of theft. I'm doing my job, I said. Protecting corporate data from security breaches. Blake tried one last desperate play, lunging toward my laptop to destroy the evidence. But the hotel conference room wasn't his natural environment, and I knew exactly where every cable and power outlet was located. I sidestepped his charge, and he crashed into the presentation table, sending laptops and legal pads scattering across the floor. The hotel's security team, alerted by Agent Reynolds, appeared in the doorway as Blake struggled to get back to his feet. You think you've won something? Victoria screamed at me as the FBI agents moved to restrain her. You've just destroyed both our careers over your hurt feelings. I looked at her calmly, this woman I'd been married to for 4 years, who'd planned to frame me for her crimes. I didn't destroy your careers, Victoria. I just made sure everyone could see what you'd already done to them. The 7 executives who'd come for a consulting presentation were now witnesses to the most dramatic corporate espionage bust in Silicon Valley history. They'd have stories to tell at networking events for years. Thomas Wright was documenting the stolen data vault materials on his phone, while Marcus Kim did the same for the Zenith data. Agent Reynolds was reading Blake and Victoria their rights as hotel security cleared the room of stunned observers. Some people think revenge is about getting even, I said to Blake as the FBI agents led him toward the door. They're wrong. Revenge is about making sure the truth has consequences. Blake stopped struggling and looked back at me with something like respect, mixed with his hatred. You planned all of this. I responded to all of this. There's a difference. Victoria was still screaming about lawsuits and wrongful arrest as they escorted her from the room, but her voice was fading as the reality of federal charges set in. Blake went quietly, probably already calculating plea bargains and reduced sentences. As the room cleared, I packed up my laptop and prepared to leave. The evidence was delivered, The arrests were made, and justice was being served with the kind of precision that only came from careful planning and meticulous execution. Agent Reynolds approached me as I headed for the door. "Mr. Walsh, this was exceptionally thorough work. Have you ever considered a career in federal law enforcement?" I smiled and shook my head. "Thanks, but I like cybersecurity. You meet such interesting people." I walked out of the Marriott into the gray San Francisco afternoon, leaving behind the wreckage of 2 careers and 1 very expensive consulting firm that would never see its second day of operation. My phone was already buzzing with calls from Data Vault's legal department, reporters who'd somehow gotten wind of the story, and what sounded like Victoria's lawyer demanding to know what evidence I had against his client. I ignored them all. There was only one call I wanted to make. "Jenny, it's David. That big project I was working on? It's finished. How did it go?" I looked back at the Marriott, where FBI agents were probably still processing the crime scene that had been Conference Room B. Through the lobby windows, I could see news vans already arriving, their satellite dishes extending toward the sky like mechanical flowers blooming in the afternoon gloom. Better than expected. Much better. "Good. You've been working too hard lately. Maybe now you can get some sleep." Sleep. Right. For the first time in months, that actually sounded possible. No more late nights documenting evidence, no more encrypted messages to decode, no more watching my wife lie to my face about working late with her boyfriend. As I walked to my rental car, I thought about Blake Morrison's parting words. He'd accused me of planning all of this, as if I'd orchestrated their affair and their corporate espionage just to have an excuse for revenge. He was wrong, of course. I hadn't planned their betrayal. I'd simply been ready when it happened. The difference between a victim and a survivor isn't what happens to you. It's what you do when it happens. My phone rang again. This time it was Thomas Wright from Data Vault. "David, I just wanted to thank you. What you uncovered today, the scope of the data theft, the client information they were planning to use, you probably saved the company millions in lost revenue. Just doing my job, Thomas. This was way beyond your job description. The board is going to want to discuss your future with the company. There's talk of a significant promotion, maybe heading up a new cybersecurity division." I smiled as I reached my car. "That sounds interesting. We'll talk Monday." I hung up and checked my messages. 17 missed calls, 43 texts, and 89 emails. The story was spreading through Silicon Valley like wildfire, the kind of corporate scandal that would dominate tech industry gossip for months. Already, I could see the headlines forming: FBI arrests, tech executives in corporate espionage sting. Silicon Valley power couple charged with stealing millions in client data. The IT guy who brought down a conspiracy. That last one made me laugh. The IT guy. Blake Morrison had been so dismissive of that title, using it like an insult. He never understood that in Silicon Valley information was everything, and the people who controlled information were the ones with real power. I started the car and pulled out of the parking garage, navigating through the cluster of news vans that were setting up for the evening broadcasts. A reporter with perfect hair and a microphone tried to flag me down, but I kept driving. The radio was already carrying updates about the story. "Breaking news this hour. FBI agents have arrested 2 Silicon Valley executives on charges of corporate espionage and conspiracy to defraud. Victoria Sterling, a senior marketing executive, and Blake Morrison, VP of Sales at Zenith Digital, were taken into custody during what sources describe as a dramatic confrontation at a downtown hotel." I turned off the radio and drove through the city in silence, past the glass towers of the financial district, through the neighborhoods where tech money had transformed every coffee shop into a networking venue and every conversation into a pitch meeting. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over, Walsh. BM. I pulled over and typed back, "Yes, it is. Your lawyer will explain why." The IT guy. Then I blocked the number and continued driving. At a red light, I found myself thinking about Victoria, probably sitting in a federal holding cell right now, trying to figure out how her perfectly planned life had collapsed so spectacularly. She'd been so confident in her ability to manipulate situations and people, so certain that she could have her affair, steal corporate data, and frame me for her crimes without consequences. The light turned green, and I drove toward home, though I supposed it wasn't really home anymore. Victoria's name was on the lease, her furniture filled the rooms, her betrayal lingered in every corner. I'd have to find a new place to live, probably something smaller and cheaper without her marketing executive salary. But for the first time in months, that prospect didn't terrify me. I'd spent so many years defining myself in relation to Victoria's success, measuring my worth against her achievements, apologizing for not being ambitious enough or connected enough or important enough. Now I understood something I should have realized years ago. I didn't need to apologize for who I was. I was the guy who kept the lights on, who protected people's data, who noticed things that others missed. I was the quiet one in the corner who everyone underestimated until they needed something fixed. And sometimes, the thing that needed fixing was a conspiracy to commit corporate espionage. My phone rang one more time. Jenny again. "I just saw the news," she said. "Holy shit, David. Blake Morrison and Victoria? They were the ones stealing company data?" "Yeah." "And you caught them? You built the whole case?" "I had help. Good partner makes all the difference." There was silence on the line for a moment. "Your wife, David, she was planning to frame you for corporate espionage. That's what this was really about, wasn't it?" I pulled into the parking garage of my apartment building and sat in the car, engine running, thinking about how to answer that question. Jenny, some people think revenge is about getting even. They're wrong. Revenge is about making sure the truth has consequences. And sometimes the truth is the most devastating weapon of all. Are you okay? I thought about it. Blake Morrison was facing federal charges that could put him in prison for years. Victoria was looking at similar penalties, plus the end of her marketing career and the complete destruction of her professional reputation. Zenith Digital would probably collapse within months once the full scope of Blake's data theft became public. Data Vault would survive, maybe even thrive, with better security protocols and a cautionary tale to tell other companies. And me? I was sitting in a parking garage, finally free from a marriage built on lies and a life spent apologizing for my own competence. "Yeah," I said. "I'm okay. I'm actually better than okay." After I hung up, I sat in the car for a few more minutes, listening to the engine tick as it cooled and watching the security cameras in the corners of the garage, the same kind of cameras that had recorded Blake. Morrison threatening me in my office, providing crucial evidence for the FBI's case. Tomorrow, there would be lawyers and depositions and probably more media attention than I wanted. Victoria's family would want explanations I didn't owe them. Blake's colleagues would distance themselves from the scandal. Federal prosecutors would prepare cases that would take months to resolve. But tonight, I was just David Walsh, cybersecurity analyst, the IT guy who'd reminded Silicon Valley that information was power and truth had consequences. I turned off the engine and walked toward the elevator, leaving behind the parking garage where this chapter of my life was ending and the next one was about to begin. Blake Morrison had been right about one thing. I was just the IT guy. But he'd forgotten the most important part of that job description. We're the ones who control the information. And in Silicon Valley, that makes us the most dangerous people of all.